Software piracy. Software piracy goes back pretty much to the first personal computers. I was a pirate. Commodore 64 was probably one of the most heavily pirated machines in history. And it's also probably a lot of people my age, I'm 42, the most beloved machine. But it definitely suffered from piracy. And it was such a neat thing back then because piracy wasn't what it is now. Let's clarify. It sucked. It was fucking horrible for the industry. But the way we went about the piracy was a lot different. Fundamentals the same. Somebody cracks the copy protection. We had crack groups, and these crack groups were located throughout Europe, the US. One of my favorite crack groups was called Eaglesoft, and being Canadian, they featured a Canadian band called Rush. So they always used to scroll the Rush lyrics along the bottom of their crack screens. So what these crack groups would do back then is create a title page for whatever game they cracked, add their music, scroller, and the scroller would generally be props to the team members, insults to other crack groups, who was the better crack group. So that was pretty huge. So that's kind of, the group started it. They would do the crack, and then they would release it, and they had a network of people with modems. And you got to remember, modems ranged from, generally 300 baud to 1200 baud when the scene kind of started. And I might be wrong on that, but I'm thinking that's roughly the range, because I know my first modem was a 300 baud. And we used to spend most of the night downloading a game. So if you got them straight from the source, and we did, there were times where I would do long distance calls across Canada, and those guys would get them from Europe, or we'd go into the States. I had horrendous bills. I probably could have bought the game, but it wasn't as exciting as downloading it. But I had some massive long distance bills that flipped my mom's lid for sure. So we would do these downloads, or we would get together and we would have meets. So we would know people who had a BBS system that would get the games uploaded to them, and then they would spread it out at computer meets. So a bunch of us would get together and we'd swap, and we'd probably bring a shitload of discs with us, because everything was 5 1/4 inch disc, and I've got some here so you can see. That's a 5 1/4 inch disc, and you can see there's 2 notches. So this would be a double-sided disc. It was 170K, I believe, on each side of these. Now what we did is, there was an actual trick to this, and you can see this is a factory 5 1/4 inch disc. So it has proper notches on both sides. You could also get these single-sided. You'd have one notch on the side here. And then what we used to do, we'd buy the single-sided ones, but the only difference was, other than a higher quality disc probably, was that this other side here wouldn't be notched out, because that's where the read head mechanism would go in to read it. So we would just get a hole puncher and buy a stack of single-sided, hole punch them, and create our own double-sided. Now this was from a Commodore 64 that I bought off eBay. And what we would do is we'd go to these meets literally with shoeboxes. So you can see that's a Reebok shoebox filled with 5 1/4 inch discs. If I had to take a guess, there's probably about 150 in here. Each of them holds on average of about 3 to 6 games. So probably about 300 games in here. So that was kind of the hard drive of the day. The Commodore 64 disk drive was about this size too. And really slow unless you had a fast load cartridge. There were some other cartridges out there that sped the process up. But it was probably about 2 to 10 minutes to copy per disc. So you get together and chips, munchies, pop, chat, play games, while you had your Commodore 64 disk drives daisy-chained copying, running programs like Auto Nibbler, which I think was Kevin Pikel's, and he went on to Electronic Arts and worked on some popular franchises. But he started out as a hacker, as a hacker writing software that enabled you to copy disks. And Auto Nibbler was probably one of the most common ones that we used. Fast Hack'em was another one. And we'd get together for a night and you'd copy 30, 40, 50 discs worth of games. And that's, the network would just tentacle out from there. So you'd have that one original game that made it over from Europe or from the States or Montreal or Toronto cracking groups, and would spread and tentacle itself across Canada. So if I had to think, I probably knew, just so you know what the damage of piracy, especially back then, our group was probably about 40 strong in terms of getting together, in our lower mainland kind of network. I think I purchased 1 or 2 games, probably had 500, roughly. So they didn't make an awful lot of software sales off us. There were a couple of games that I bought. I bought Ultima 4 eventually because I liked the packaging of the Origin games. They had cloth maps and little things in there and awesome manuals. Might and Magic was another game I purchased, and Bard's Tale. So I did have some originals. So okay, more than 2, but you get the point. If it was good enough even back then, you bought it. I'm not justifying it. It was wrong. Piracy's still around, but that's kind of how we went about it back then, which is it's definitely more of a social thing.